Conversation is what allows the salesperson to understand the buyer, understand the problem, help shape the definition of the problem, give the buyer trust and confidence that they're there to help. The definition of non-productivity is activity without impact. And yet, if you look at all the sales methodologies and the sales metrics and all the things everybody touts on the internet, it's all about activity. How much faster can we do everything? How do I measure activity and still move sales? You go, well, it's actually pretty easy.
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Great, Mike, and thanks for having me on today, and appreciate the forum. And as you know, I really enjoy and have followed you guys for a long time. I'm a big believer in what you're doing. Not surprised you're getting traction from larger companies. I spent a lot of time in early stage getting them ramped quickly, but the same things I do apply to big companies, and I'm getting interest there as well. And the reason is, I think, because no one, whether it's a small company or a large company, is getting the return they expect from marketing, and they're not getting the sales performance they expect for the money they're spending. And the reason is how they're going to market, and what they track, what they focus on. They're focused on activity. And I guess one of my favorite sayings, and I tell this to early stage founders all the time, the definition of non-productivity is activity without impact. And yet, if you look at all the sales methodologies and the sales, metrics and all the things everybody touts on the internet these days, it's all about activity. How much faster can we do everything, right? But there's no way to measure quality. And so why? The reason is that when digital came along, right, the internet, it took away the prospect's need and desire to have a conversation with a salesperson. So what happened? Marketing gets their message out there, and they've got their websites and all their digital media, and they're not getting the prospects they need. They're not getting the pipelines they need. So what do? They go out and hire SDRs, they hire agencies, they hire a bunch of people to go make sure that those target ICPs, those targeted buyers, are getting the message, right? They send emails, they put stuff online. They basically say to the SDR teams, you make sure that these stakeholders, these ICPs get this message. And so they do. They spam them. They do everything they can possibly do. And when they get them, what do? They start with a demo. They're trying to sell you the demo, sell you the presentation. Hey, you got to see this. Doesn't work. In fact, not only does it not work, it's the best way I know to kill curiosity and interest. It's the best pipeline killing program I've ever seen in my life. People go, well, what do you mean? Why is that? The reason is, and you know this very well, is that the way you start a sales cycle is a conversation. Conversation is what allows the salesperson to understand the buyer, understand the problem, help shape the definition of the problem, give the buyer trust and confidence that they're there to help them, right? And so what happens when you start with the demo? None of that. The first thing you do with the demo is you kill curiosity. Why? Well, you show them the product. They're not curious anymore. They've seen it. Okay, great. And they're not yet interested because they haven't yet admitted that the problem they have, whatever that happens to be, is something that they have to solve right now. And so there's no problem vision alignment to the solution you're showing them. And when the solution is new, what happens? The prospect goes, well, I don't think of my problem that way. Of course you don't. You've never seen a solution. Do we have executives and managers running around the Fortune 1000 saying, hey, boss, I got a big problem, but there's no solution to it? No. So what do? They define problems in terms of solutions they don't know. Well, they don't know yours. You just showed it to them, but it doesn't align with their problem vision. So what does that mean? They look at it, they say, I don't completely understand this. I definitely don't like something about it. and you've killed interest at the same time. So congratulations, you got that presentation demo, and you killed interest and you killed curiosity. Now, when does that not happen? When do you actually get a prospect? When you happen to stumble over an interested party who's got the problem, who wants to find a solution. Yeah, that's about 2 to 4% of the market. So you're spending millions of dollars to go find people who you're supposed to find anyway, and ignoring the 96% of the market that you could be developing interest in with a conversation by trying to jump over those steps. And that just doesn't work. And so by starting with a conversation, you really are starting sales pipeline development. It's real.
Look, you know what I really like about this, Mike? You start jump right into the problem. So like, let's
Yeah.
cut the fluff. Let's just talk about the problem. And I know you're very passionate about this subject because
Yeah.
you keep publishing great articles around like what's actually not working in go to market and sales in general. And you had a great point. You didn't start with, okay, let's just fix the way our reps converse when they get the lead. You're talking about another level. You're talking top of a funnel, talking
Yeah.
about looking at ICP, looking at that 96% to your point that are not ready to actually buy.
That's a great point, Michael. It starts with the planning process, right? Salespeople and sales managers don't plan the right way. Here's what happens: somebody hands you a territory and a quota, and they say, hey, build a plan. And they say the plan structure is what? Goals, objectives, strategies, plans and activities. And so what does the salesperson do? He starts with what they give him, goals and objectives. That's the wrong place to start, because the salesperson thought, what? Quota is really hard. So here's what I'm going to do: I'm going to pick a number 20 or 30% over quota, so my boss likes my plan. And then I'm going to come up with these strategies that I have no idea whether I can execute. And then I'm going to say that I'm going to do these things to execute them, whether or not I have the time or the resource to do it. And then I'm going to say, that's my plan, set my objectives. I'm going to throw it in a drawer and I'm never going to look at it again, because why? I didn't think the quota was doable, much less the objective that I set in the plan I gave you. So I tell salespeople all the time, get rid of that. You can't run a territory and exceed quota if you don't have a good plan. How do you do that? You start with a novel concept. You start with facts. Plans that start with facts are better plans than plans that start with assumptions. So what are the facts? The facts are the things about your accounts, your territories, your products that you know to be true. I know I have these customers. I know I do better in these verticals. I know that customers who are highly regulated, prospects are highly regulated, I do well with. If they're in competitive businesses, I do well with them. If they're growing, I do well with them. If they're in this revenue band, I do well with them, right? Whatever they happen to be. If they're customers, I do better than if they're just cold prospects, right? So that's the first thing you do. Get the facts. Okay. Once you have the facts, find the opportunities. Okay, you know the 5 or 6 best characteristics of customers that are most likely, prospects that are most likely to buy. Well, here's a novel idea and a proven fact. Salespeople who spend more of their time with people that are more likely to buy sell more.
So I get your point. Do your fact check. But just imagine you're in the position of an AE. You have your quota, you have the accounts that they
Yep.
hand over. And I think the root cause is bigger than just reps doing the due diligence and get the fact check and then do the planning. I think it all starts from when we have our meeting in the board, and then the CRO comes and says, this is the vision, this is the number. And I've seen it before. Roll it out. And even when we hire, let's say you go out for a VP, bring them
Yeah.
over. This is the target. Can you hit it or not? So first and foremost, let's just see how many of these accounts we've closed so far. Can we just look at the patterns? Are we actually trying to, build a playbook from day zero and build the patterns? Or do we have something repeatable so I can expand on? So I think the root cause is really layered and it goes to the C-suite and then gets down to the rep,
Yeah. To a degree, I would say this. That's true, but the problem, why that problem exists, is that the board and the senior executives don't understand the tweaks they have to make to the organization and the enablement and the infrastructure to deliver that number, right? I would tell you that quota is laughable in most companies. However, what they have their reps doing is even more laughable, so they don't make their numbers. Like I did this at just about every company I've been in. I'll never forget the best one of all was a big tech company. These guys thought their quota was ridiculously high. And when I took them through the process, they were embarrassed at how low it was. They literally had the quota is like, oh my God, this is the floor. And every single solitary rep crushed their quota. They didn't all make their objectives, but they killed their quota. So you have to make adjustments to how you do things. And I can do that as a business unit owner, right? But if you're going to do that across the company, to your point, you better make those adjustments across the company. And you don't do that,
Can we
right?
talk about those adjustments? I'm really curious to understand, like based on your experience, you've been around and done that with
Yep.
different size companies. I'm curious just to hear about some of these uh, most common problems that you've seen,
Sure.
fixing. And can we just dig in and understand like where to even look at the beginning?
Absolutely. So they exist in I'd say three major areas. The first one is how they deploy their resources, right? The way they actually look at their accounts, the dollars available to them in those accounts. They have salespeople that have performed well. Oh, we can't take away their accounts. Okay. You don't have to really. But and then we have new salespeople and they come in. What do? We give them a ramp quota for 3 months and then we expect them to perform like the guy that's been here for 2 years. It's not going to happen. Why do you expect that to happen? And then you roll the numbers up like that. The right way to do it is to say, look, you have to make the jobs equal. So I'll give you an example. I'm a rep. I've been here for 2 years. I've got a $2 million quota, but I know where $1 million of that quota is coming from. I also know where the places I'm going to go to try to get the other $1 million, right? Well, that rep has only so much time. The accounts he has to go get the million where he knows he's going to get it. He's got to spend time. That gives him half the time to go get the other million, right? The new rep doesn't have an idea where $1 is going to come from, right? Well, he can't be expected to go out and get $2 million. He doesn't have enough time. He doesn't have enough experience. You want to make those jobs equal? You give him a $1 million quota because the other guy knows where he's getting his million. Now, why are they even? They're even jobs now because the guy who has to go get the 1 million, who already knows where a million's coming from, he has 50% of the time to do that. The guy that has to go get a million from scratch, he has twice as much time to do that. So now you have more equal jobs. And that other rep is going to get tenure and he's going to do better that way, right? That's an example. That one example. The other one is, do you know where your A accounts are? And have you deployed them reasonably equally across your salespeople? If you haven't, you're skewing the opportunity in a way that's going to make it hard for you to ramp up to that number, right? So that's one big issue that I find. The second one is this whole concept of lots of activity, right? You only have so much resource. And your salespeople are one of your resources. But what do the salespeople need to prosecute and close the business? Do they need SDRs? Do they need sales engineers? Do they need product managers? What do they need? And how much of their time, of those people's time, is going toward productive activity that's going to yield revenue? If you simply make it about activity and you can't measure impact, what does that mean? To do more revenue, I need more people, right? Well, That doesn't compute inside the board because we only have this much budget, right? So now what happens? You are absolutely required at that point, if you're not going to expand your teams to, in order to keep the same activity level across all these people, you better be doing more productive activity with the people you have every year. And they have no processes in place to do that. And so the numbers become more and more unrealistic. That's the second one. And then the third one I would say is that companies don't understand how to generate pipeline at all, right? We live in a digital world. You don't generate pipeline with email. No, you have to have multi-channel campaigns, but that's not the only thing you have to do. If you have an SDR function or you're a salesperson, it's about your brand. It's about how you sell. Prospects don't want to talk to salespeople. They want to talk to peers. You have to become a part of their ecosystem. Don't go out there and try to, sell your product to people who you've never spoken to. Don't go out there and talk about your product, right? Talk about the problems that people have, the challenges. So if I'm a new salesperson, an SDR, or I'm even just a salesperson that's trying to generate new contacts, I join the LinkedIn networks therein. I post articles. I blog. I comment on my ICP social posts, right? I become part of their ecosystem. I talk about the challenges they have. Why? Because it's about them. It's not about me. It's not about my product. It's about them. And if you do that, they start to look at you as one of them. And guess what? They're more likely to start a conversation with you if they do that. And those, if your SDRs and your salespeople do that, and those are the real issues I think that get in the way of building sustainable, scalable pipeline.
I love
I mean, when
it.
you think about it, Michael, right? 96% of the market's not looking, and we can't build pipeline. No, that market, if 4% of the market's looking and 96% of the market's not, right? The market that's not looking is 20 times the size of the market that is looking. If you're not building pipeline regularly, you're not addressing that 96% of the market. And that's the absolute truth. What's happening is companies are looking for interest. They go, oh, our SDR, we're here to build pipeline. No, you're not. You're there to go find people who are interested that you can put into this quarter or next quarter forecast. That's what you're looking for. And how do I know that? Because you're starting with a demo and a presentation. That's what people who are already interested want to see. So stop fooling yourself into thinking that you're building pipeline. You're not. You're going after the 4% of the market everybody else is going after, and you're ignoring the 96% of the market where you could be building pipeline and having initial conversations, creating curiosity, creating interest. That's what people need to do today. And if they don't build that way, they're not going to scale, because you can't continuously build a pipeline and increase revenue if you're only going after the 4% of the market that's interested at a given point in time. You're going to plateau, and you're going to have an extremely hard time building pipeline beyond that.
Right. Look, Mike, you shared a lot, and I have many, many questions.
Yeah.
But I want to start by asking you this. You're saying building pipeline. Okay, it's different from doing lead generation. Building pipeline. You
Yes.
mentioned let's get our reps, whether it's SDRs or AEs, where our buyers live and be part of the community and help build that brand. So
Yep.
by positioning ourselves as someone who has a different point of view, sharing an angle about something that maybe they didn't think about, that certain problem or even solution relevant to
Yes.
that problem. So people might relate and they might actually think, oh, I didn't look at this. Maybe we have this problem. That's why things are not moving forward. So
That's right.
education is part of the process, and we want to skip that because, to your point, it's hard to measure those type of activities. So just imagine you have an AE, great at dark social, can go out there, generate great content, have conversations, and very top of funnel perspective, no funnel perspective, just get into a conversation with someone
Right.
on LinkedIn, on the phone, it doesn't matter where.
That's
But it's
right.
hard to measure that. So
Right.
how should leaders today just really realize that this is the way? So I think by now we all know that things are not moving forward. If you look at any reports or stats, we see like what 70-80% of deals are not
Yep.
going through, right?
That's right.
And this has been a pattern for the past 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
it's nothing new. But how can we bring this shift to our organization that we believe that okay, that's okay, that is okay not to measure activity, and just give this chance to our reps and prepare them actually for new activities that might generate a more meaningful pipeline.
Right. Yeah. So the way I talk about that is I measure conversion, right? And with AI now, that's a good thing to measure because I want to know what is it that's moving sales through the process, right? So when we start at the very top of the funnel with lead generation, right? The first thing you have to do is think about what you're selling, right? What do I sell? Do I sell a new and innovative technology? Or do I sell something that's well established in the market, right? Depending on which one you sell, you have a very different approach. So let's take the startup who's got new technology, right? The very first thing you want to do in everything you do once you've joined the ecosystem and you get into those conversations, you do not want to talk about the product. You want to talk about a different definition of the problem. And there's a very good reason for that. So why do I talk about a different definition of the problem? How do I do it? The first thing I do is I acknowledge in my marketing and my campaigns how they view the problem now, because I can't establish any credibility with you if I don't get on the same page, right? So you prospect saying, yeah, that's how I look at the problem. Then I say, here are some things that we found actually cause that problem. And I take what their definition of the problem is and I use them as symptoms of the real problem. Now, why is that really important in new prospects when you're dealing with new technology? It's important because the buyers of new technology are innovators and early adopters. I'm a small company. I only have so much resource, right? What do I want? I want leads from innovators and early adopters. What do innovators and early adopters like to do? They like to solve old problems new ways. And so the pipeline I build from the top is filled with innovators and early adopters. They're my buyer. So guess what? I got a much better chance of moving them through to a sale than if I just try to appeal to the entire market without doing that. Because 85% of the buyers out there, and this is from Crossing the Chasm with Jeffrey Moore, they're not your buyer. Now flip that onto, okay, what about we've crossed the chasm and I'm one of 5 or 6 products. Okay, now you meet the buyer where they live, just like you did before. Only now you talk about the the successes and what the key components of success are. Because these only 2 things that are going to differentiate you and want that buyer to deal with you. One is he believes that he's going to actually be able to implement yours successfully for greater value than the others. And the second one is the relationship you build. And so you go about that differently. So when you get them in the top of the funnel, okay, once they're there, then you have to manage them correctly. And this is where it falls totally apart and why things just sit there, right? It's because people don't view or don't have a buyer's process. They have a selling process. It's funny. I ask CVPs of sales all the time. So tell me about your last 10 sales. Okay. How many of them followed the process you have in the order you have it? None. Okay. None. Great. Now I want to ask you about your top rep. Yep, your top reps. How do they like the CRM? Oh, they hate it. Why do they hate it? Or why don't they like it? What's the overwhelming response you get from them when you ask them about why they aren't diligent about the CRM? It's almost always, that's not how I sell. Okay. So your sales process is not followed by your buyers and not how your top performers sell, but you stick with it. You know why
Madness.
you stick with it? Because you can measure the activity. Stop that. Well, then people will say to me, well, how do I measure activity? How do I measure activity and still move sales? I go, well, it's actually pretty easy. You need to outline the buyer's process and map your sales processes to it. And they say, well, Mike, what do you mean by that? Look, the buyer's process is an emotional one. You have to make them aware. You have to get them curious and interested. You have to get them motivated to solve the problem they have with a product like yours. You have to get them to motivated to solve the problem they have with your product, and you have to close them. That's their process. That's what you have to take them through. Now, beneath that is what? A whole bunch of activities that move them through that process. Map those activities to that process. Now, why do you do that? You do that because those are the impactful activities that are going to move the sale. Your sales process is one activity out of probably 10 a salesperson could be doing. And they say, oh, yeah, that's it. Well, but then how do we enable that? You already have enabled it. You just don't realize, you don't give the salesperson the freedom to execute the activity that they believe is the next best activity. You want them to execute your sales process, right? And so I say to them all the time, your salesperson, he's a quarterback, right? Yeah, they're the quarterback, right? Okay. So why don't you get them have the playbook? You know how a quarterback on a football field, he looks at that little thing on his arm and he's got a whole bunch of plays there that he can call. Depending on the situation, he finds himself on the field. Salesperson's in the same spot. Depending on where the prospect is, I want 3 or 4 or 5 things I could do to move that prospect, which is right for this particular case. So the salesperson defines the process within those swim lanes. And then you align those resources you have to those activities. And so what do you have? You have salespeople who know where the prospect is, executing the next best step with the right resource to move the sale. And so what happens? The sales move through the process. And and when that happens, what else happens? That problem we talked about earlier, right? Where I have to do more productive things with about the same number of people. Well, that's what happens because now salespeople are not just executing a straight out sales process, whether or not the activity is effective or not. They're consciously executing more effective activities with the right resource. By definition, revenue goes up, cost of sale goes down. That's what solves the problem, and that's what's lacking today. Now, I've always used this approach, and let me tell you, not only does it give you higher revenue and lower cost, but it gives you something else everybody's talking about today. It gives you coaching metrics. It gives you coaching advice. Well, how does it do that? Well, when you outline your buyer's process that way, you recognize that there are certain skills which go along with those stages to get curiosity and interest generated. You have to know how to do discovery. You have to know how to qualify. To get people interested to the point where they're going to be motivated to do something, you have to know how to present. To convince somebody that yours is the proper solution, you have to know how to prove. To close, you have to know how to negotiate, how to deliver ROI, and how to deliver business cases and so on. Those are all skills. So when I look at my dashboard, I see, oh, this rep has deals stuck in this stage for a longer period of time than other reps. Here's the skills that this rep needs coaching and training for. Now, that's very powerful because now I know how to coach and how to train the rep. But here's the other thing that's really powerful. It's what makes coaching and training stick. And people say, why? It's like baseball, right? If you don't have the framework to practice the skill and repeat the skill, you don't know when to apply it and you don't do it. So for example, sales is an anticipation and reaction business. So I tell people, look, when the pitcher's pitching and you're hitting, the pitcher is the buyer. You have to hit the ball where they pitch it. You can anticipate where they're going to pitch it. You can try to coax them into throwing you a certain pitch, but you got to hit it where they pitched it, right? And when you're playing the field and they're hitting, they're the buyer. You're the fielder. You're the seller. Why? You have to catch the ball where they hit it. Now, you can anticipate where they're going to hit it. You can start moving toward where you think they're going to hit it, but you got to go catch it where they hit it, right? And so you have to have that framework to be able to react, and you have to have the skill, right? So how do you get the skill? You have to be put in a situation to practice the skill. When they hit you a fly ball, you learn, you don't bend down like it's going to be a ground ball, right? You have to know, hey, I gotta go back on this ball. I have to do this or that to catch this ball, right? The problem we have with sales training today is every sales trainer focuses on skill. I don't. I go, listen, there's a ton of great guys out there that can train you in skill. I'm going to train you in fundamentals. What do all the sales trainers think? Well, they know the fundamentals. No, they don't. Well, what do you mean, Mike? What do you mean they don't? A baseball player picks up a bat and a glove when he's 5 years old. By the time he's 25, 20, 25, a tiny percentage of those people make the pros, right? A salesperson doesn't start selling till he goes to work for a company when he's 21 or 22 years old. You really think he knows the fundamentals? No, he does not know the fundamentals. And so if he doesn't have the fundamentals ingrained in him, if they don't have a sales process that forces the execution of the fundamentals, you'll never teach them skill. But if you have a sales process that forces the fundamentals, they'll learn skill and they'll apply skill and they will develop skill and it will stay with them. And this is what the core underlying issue is with training salespeople and getting them skillful, getting them to be able to execute like A players execute.
Mike, you covered so much. And it's so fascinating, and I love it so much. But what's really interesting to me, you did not focus on let's talk about skill gaps. You took it 10 layer, before that. So
Yes.
first and foremost, let's get to know ourselves. Like, what are we? Are we that, fast growing startup or early stage startup, better to say? And we are trying to get some early adopters just to basically use our innovative product because that's what they want, to your point. Old problem, new solution. But for the sake of our audience that are already, past that crossing the chasm, they're already in stages that are later stages.
Sure.
The problem is we stick to what? To common frameworks and methodologies that we know. Call it MEDDIC,
Yes.
MEDDIC, whatever it might be.
I
And
just I just did a big article on MEDDIC, right? Oh my God. So people actually think MEDDIC's a sales methodology. It's not. MEDDIC is a qualification framework. And the guys out there teaching it today, a lot of them, especially if they work for MEDDIC, are people that don't even really know how it was born, what is in it, how it's really meant to be used, right? MEDDIC was built in the 1990s at Parametric Technologies, PTC. Now it's based on three extremely popular and famous sales methodologies, right? One of them is solution selling by Michael Bosworth. One of them is strategic selling by Miller Hyman. And one of them is Sandler. In the 90s, late 80s and 90s, everybody took those courses. Everybody did, right? And so what MEDDIC became was the shorthand. So, solution selling defined had certain terms, and some of those were in common with strategic selling, and some with Sandler. So what MEDDIC started out was as a shorthand for like how do we get commonality across all these methodologies to talk about a deal so everything has the same meaning. But when you look at MEDDIC itself, they say, well, this is what you need to sell. No, I use it, but I add a ton to it. My forecast accuracies and the people that I've worked, it's 90 over 90%. So I did an article today. If your forecast accuracy is not over 90%, your MEDDIC needs a medic. It needs a doctor. It needs somebody to help you, right? And so these methodologies, they're not how you really sell, right? In the world of MEDDIC, they talk about metric. Okay, that's the pain quantification, right? The pain the user feels, that's the actual challenge that's they take that's personal to them, right? Well, think about MEDDIC. Who experiences the pain? The user buyer and the technical buyer. Those two buyer personas don't even exist in MEDDIC. Well, how do you sell with a? Well, why? Because the PTC guys understood that. They defined that as part of how they defined the pain. But in MEDDIC, they don't even teach it, right? In Miller Hyman, there's a whole concept at the end of MEDDIC called strategy to win. People look at me like, what's that? What do you mean, what's that? It's the strategy that you have to have, right, to win. You have to be politically, organizationally, and operationally aligned with the buyer in order to get the deal. Where is that? It's not in MEDDIC, right? How do you strategize an account without an org chart? It's not there, right? So there are major, big holes. Now, it's why do people gravitate toward it today? Because it brings a little bit of sanity to all the activity that people are running around doing that have no real plan built around it, right? So it's better than not doing anything, but it's not the optimal way to manage sales cycles. You have to add a lot to it. And that's what I've always done. And then you have to operationalize it in your CRM. You no one's going to look, salespeople, if you don't operationalize if you don't automate what you want them to do, they're going to do whatever they want, right? So here's the thing. If I automate the wrong process, but I have the right process and it's manual, which one do you think a salesperson is going to use? It's going to use the automated process because it's easier, even though it's wrong. Well, why are you doing that? And again, sales managers ask me all the time, well, what do you, I go, look, you've got CRM, outreach, Zoom, Sixth Sense. I can go on and on and on with the technologies. How's that working out for you? You're not increasing revenue and reducing costs. Why? Because you're automating the wrong process with the technology. If you automate the wrong process, what are you going to do? You're going to do non-productive things faster. That's exactly what you're doing.
Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, you just don't have the bandwidth, so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails. These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With Sell Me the Spend AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only, revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at sellmethespend.ai. Let me ask you this. So would you say the biggest root cause of all this evil is the process?
Yes. Yep.
Would that be fair
I
to
would
say?
absolutely say that. It's the root cause of all this craziness is you have a sales process that does not take into consideration the way buyers buy. That's number one. And number two, you measure activity without impact. Those two things are the worst two things that you could possibly do when you try to sell in the B2B world.
So let me add something to this because I agree with you. we follow our sales process not the way buyers want to buy. I completely agree with that. And being an early stage startup, I don't follow any methodology. Yes, I've been selling before, so I try to again understand the emotions behind the buy and the pain, and how to basically we bring our solution to it. But just imagine a company already past that crossing the chasm. You got use cases, you have many clients, and you hired a lot of reps. The whole system is built. When you go inside these organizations and you meet with multiple different stakeholders and ask a simple question, what problem are you solving for who? When you get multiple different answers to that, and then you dig in and say, now let's talk about that persona that you named. Tell me about what's happening in their lives and how your solution can actually help. You hear multiple different answers to that. I think the problem is, or maybe I'm mistaken, but I want to hear your perspective on it, that we don't even know our buyers. Even our leaders don't know exactly who the main ICP is. Not ICP, buyer persona. I don't want to call it ICP.
Yes, you're spot on, Michael, because and your company does good with this. First of all, they're not having enough conversations. They don't know how to do that, right? But let's say they do. You're absolutely right. They do. Those are the different things. They're going to hear different things, right? So what happens if buyers have different needs, different challenges, different things that they find important, and you use the same rote, seller focused process to try to sell them? You're going to fail. And that's what you're seeing. This is why what I teach salespeople is, look, you got to get to know the prospect, right? Have conversation. But once you know them and you understand sort of how they look at things, what they need, there's a list of 10 things you can do as a next step to help them through their process. Pick one. But when I have a rote sales process that only has one, I have to do that. And so, for example, we've had a conversation about a problem, right? Maybe an ebook would be good for you to look at. Maybe a webinar, maybe a follow-up conversation, maybe a deeper dive with a more technical resource, maybe a conversation with one of our clients, maybe a conversation with one of our product managers, maybe a meeting with some more people on your. Those are any one of 10 things you could be doing. But the salesperson's not thinking like that. Salesperson's like, how do I get them a demo? Or how do I move? Right? They want to jump to the next step in their sales process. Your sales process is killing you because you're trying to take the prospect in a place where it's not natural for them to go.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And you know what's so funny, Mike? I sometimes make this mistake too. I don't want to sound cocky that I figured everything out, and I make mistakes too. So just putting it out there, one thing I know I'm doing good right now is disqualifying when I see senior leader does not know what the problem they're solving for who. And if I remind them based on the conversation and data I gathered talking to functional leaders, and they still don't want to listen to it. Before, when we were talking about the problems, speaking of talking about certain problems differently, I was really bullish on talking reps don't know about their bar personas. Then we went one layer higher and said we need to coach the coach because the coach doesn't know the bar persona. Now the way I look at it, in certain organizations, and you'll be shocked, you're talking about large organizations, even the VP level, CRO level, they don't know the actual buyer themselves. Like, get in the trenches, not listen to even, just literally get in front of a buyer. Now, in contrary, we have some clients that we see the senior leader is the first person who adopt to what we are providing or any other solutions they're buying, is the most excited person about anything new coming into the organization, and they know what they're actually trying to fix. That's where we know, okay, we are looking at the right fit. But it's really difficult again when the company gets large and hefty and you have multiple different decision makers, and how to build that alignment. I think that's your art and expertise as a seller, to really how to navigate that and find those champions within those accounts.
I think that's so. One of the things I teach salespeople keep in mind is, look, you're going to be talking to prospects who are either innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority resistors, or laggard types of buyers. You're going to hear in the conversations which one they are. Keep that in your head, right? Because you have to sell them a certain way. So, for example, I'll get, oh, yeah, Mike, I hear you, but oh my God, I can't change all my processes. I can't, what you're telling me is maybe true, but, it's too radical, blah, blah, blah. So, first thing I do is say, well, okay, doesn't have to be. Well, why not? Well, I'm not going to change your sales process. I thought you were. No, I'm going to give your salespeople an understanding of where the buyers are in their process. You don't do that today. Yes, it's something new, but it's not a change yet. Well, what are you going to do with my sales process? I'm going to map it to those stages so your salespeople know which step of your process to execute when. Oh, okay. And I might just say that. Now, the truth is there's 10 other things I can add to each phase of their process, but I'm not going to introduce that because it'll make their head explode. Whereas if I'm talking to an innovator and early adapter, I'm going to say, I'm going to change the way your salespeople look at the buyer, and I'm going to change the way your process functions with those types of stages. Now, why am I going to say that? Because that guy's an innovator and early adapter. He wants to change, right? So I'm listening for what kind of buyer are they? How are they looking at the problem today? Do they even agree they have a problem? Because look, if I'm selling and you don't even think you have a problem, I'm going to move on because there's enough people out there who do. Now, I may have to draw it out of them, but once I try to draw it out of them and they're not going there, okay, I'm not. I got other things to do.
Mike, you said something really, really, really important, and actually extend on what I said about bar personas. And I'm going to steal it from you because I forgot about it a little bit. So, when you're early in your journey as a startup, it's all about validating, to your point, the type of bar that you're dealing with. Are they those early adopters? Are they laggers? Who are they? It's beyond bar persona in terms of like technicalities, but emotionally, who are they? And I think this is one of the things that we forget when we grow to certain size. When we pass that crossing the chasm, we don't bring that startup mindset, and we don't teach or remind our reps that the emotional decision is more important than just their day to day.
Yeah,
And
for
to your
sure.
point, and if you're talking not transactional deals, they're more complex deals. You might get multiple different archetypes, different
Yes.
personality within the deal, right?
Yes.
How to be able to identify that? I barely hear anyone talking about this. So
It's
even
well, absolutely right. And that's because I mean, I can't tell you the number of sales teams I've taken over and go, we start with a deal review. Hey, can I see an org chart? Blank stare. What do you mean you don't have an org chart? Well, I'm working with so and so and so and so. Yeah, I know that. I want to see the org chart. Why do you want to see the org chart? Because you need to understand the structure of the organization, how people report. I go, you can tell things just from looking at the titles about the type of person these people are, the culture of the organization you're selling to, right? And then we're going to talk about the personas in your sale in context of that company's organization. We're going to talk about who you might have missed in the cycle by looking at the org chart, right? And then we're going to talk about the actual people in the cycle that you're talking to and how they align, right? Because you have to know that in order to figure out how to build the strategy to win the account, right? And so it's things like, the higher you go typically by title, generally, but not always, the more risk the executives will take. The lower you are, the less risk. Okay. So if I'm going to sell something, a very simple concept, right? Hey, if the executive wants to take the risk, right? Do you think he's going to ask the user if they're going to use it? Do you think he's going to ask the technical people if it works? Of course he is. But that's change, isn't it? Yes. Now remember, how open to change are they? Oh, well, I'm not very, okay. So we got to talk about that. How do we get those folks to embrace change and convince the executive buyer that they're going to use what is being bought? And that goes across the whole sales cycle. You have to take those things into account if you're going to sell. And when I talk about a strategy to win, operationally, politically, organizationally, that's how you have to align. And organizations and politics are all about people. So if you don't know the people and you're not looking at those type of things, your chances of winning go down.
This tells me that many people that talk about AI changing things, replacing things, my AI cannot do this. I'm one of the best AI coaches in the market. I can claim that. But
Right.
we cannot analyze and really break down the dynamics, the cultural aspect of each organization, because I generally believe this is one of the most important things, at least for us, if we are culturally even fit, or even we understand their cultures at all. And then, to a point, just the breakdown of different personalities or archetypes. Like this is, I don't know anyone can really do this
Not
properly.
yet. Not yet. But here's what I'll tell you about that. And I have great hopes for AI. If you organize the sales process I'll call it a sales framework. If you have a sales framework that maps your activities to the buyer's process and your resources to those activities, right? You can write AI programs that are going to look at all that data and say, with this kind of buyer, here's the most effective next step, right? With this kind of buyer and this kind of product, here's the most effective pipeline generation campaign you can run. But it's all about how you organize the data and how you build the process. And today it's not built right. If you really want to take advantage of AI, here are the stages the buyer goes through: attention, interest, desire, conviction, close. Here are the steps or the activities you could execute to naturally move them through that process. Here are the resources you use to do that, right? Now, when I have all that data, I can ask AI things like, what's the next best step? What best campaign can I run? Where am I falling down with this presentation? What am I missing in this presentation to get this kind of buyer to react right? That AI doesn't exist today, but it doesn't exist because the actual framework for selling more efficiently doesn't exist.
Really enjoyed this conversation, Mike. I appreciate
Yeah.
you joining. If someone wants to reach out, how can they reach out to you?
LinkedIn, just Mike Conti, 182. I'm also part of another company called CRM Assist. I actually do the training around this type of methodology, and my partner actually implements it inside of either HubSpot or Salesforce.com.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed this
I did.
episode, and all the best, I guess, until next time. Bye for now.
Thanks, Michael. Enjoyed it. We'll talk again.